It's been a while, too long as a matter of fact, but back and better than ever. Eric Bischoff is here on Notsam Wrestling. What's going on, man? How are you?
I'm doing well. My wife and I are here in Minnesota visiting friends and family, and on our way to the Rolling Stones concert coming up this weekend. So life is good, brother.
It sounds pretty good. And in the meantime, so between hanging out in Minnesota with deer heads behind you and going to see the Rolling Stones, you're just getting the internet wrestling community all fired up again.
Well, good. Somebody has to. It's been kind of boring, right?
Well, yeah, so that's where I wanted to start, because even before you were kind of involved in all this kind of talk and controversy, you were an opinion that I was curious about in general, because when you talk about competition, especially competition with WWE and competition in professional wrestling, I mean, you're the godfather of it, at least for my generation, right? And when you talk about cable TV, that's kind of your gig. When you look at all this conversation happening and all of it happening all the time now, do you think to yourself, this is really good for business? Or do you think to yourself, this can go wrong?
It's both. Mm-hmm. In fairness, I think it's good in general because it represents interest and passion. But I think it has the potential of being bad, which is one of the reasons that I spoke up. And listen, I'm going to go into a much more long form, probably 3-hour conversation about all of this on my next podcast. And I'm not saying that as a means to promote it, but it's a complex conversation. And I think for the most part, I've been very supportive of AEW. Very supportive. Even in the comments that I made that got so much attention over the past week, I think that the clip that we put out from our podcast has got like 1 million impressions and over 200,000 views or whatever it is. And I've gotten an overwhelming amount of response to it. And a lot of people agree with me. A lot of people don't. I like that. That's energy, man. That's passion. And the fact that there's so much passion and so much energy when it comes to sports entertainment or professional wrestling, whatever you want to call it. How can that be anything but good?
Yeah. No, I love the conversation, obviously. As a fan, I mean, the more the better. But I think with you specifically, people were shocked at the idea of Shut Up and Wrestle being your thing when, as soon as Nitro started, not only was it giving away WWE's results, but I remember sitting there as a kid watching your show. I can't believe, if somebody asked me today, actually my wife, I was talking about it with yesterday, I said, no, I really like Eric. He's a good dude. He's one of those guys that I actually like as a human being. But if I had said that to myself in 95, 96, I hated you. Because I was a WWE kid. I was a WWE guy. So you came in and declared yourself the enemy. Not only were you giving results away, but you were insulting Shawn Michaels' super kick.
Well, that deserved to be criticized. Keep in mind, I spent a lot of time in martial arts. I was an instructor. I fought competitively as a black belt. I even had a couple pro fights back before UFC became the UFC, and it was called, not it was called, but there was the PKA, the Professional Karate Association, that fought on ABC Wide World of Sports and CBS Sports Spectacular. I didn't fight on that. Well, I think I did fight on CBS Sports, but nonetheless, from a martial arts perspective, and that being something that, I'm a little familiar with, certainly, that super kick deserved to be criticized. It had nothing to do with my feelings about Shawn Michaels or WWE. That was just a horseshit super kick.
So that wasn't even a shot across the bow. That wasn't Raw versus Nitro. That
was just calling it right down the middle. It was when all of your body weight is leaning away from your intended target. That ain't a kick. I don't know. If you watch a really good kicker, someone who will stand up straight, pick up that knee, and shoot that side kick out when they're almost perpendicular to the ground and their body weight is moving into the target, that's a side kick. That's a super kick. But that leaning way back where your head's about 8 inches off the mat while you're kicking up in the air, you couldn't crack a fucking egg with that kick.
This is why I love you, because you're still justifying the super kick comments. Like you're still.
I was criticizing it based on the technical merits or lack thereof.
So, what do you think when there's Twitter and social media? I think has brought so many conversations to the forefront. I think that I personally believe that wrestling fans were just as tribal back then as they are now, except back then it was kind of confined to message boards and wrestling fan bubbles. And now, I mean, you've said it, you talked about it in the clip, like the internet wrestling community is kind of just the wrestling community. I mean, everybody's got a Twitter account. Everybody's talking about it. There are fans that are more hardcore than others. But I think that the fact that these conversations are now happening on Twitter and Facebook, and everybody is seeing these comments, and I think that there are a lot of fans that wouldn't have gotten exposed to it that are now feeling like, oh, should I be picking a side here? I think that that's the difference. Do you think that fans are different now or more tribal, or that the conversation is more toxic now than it was then?
No, I don't. I think fans are just, look, it's really interesting to kind of go back in time and think about this and think about how the world has changed, since we launched Nitro, which, just to remind people listening to this, was actually head to head, not like kind of, sort of, maybe in a way head to head. It was head-to-head competition, which, by the way, wasn't my idea. That was Ted Turner's idea. My job was to execute it as best I could, and I did, didn't I? But if you go back, and it may be hard because I don't know how old you are, Sam, but 25 years ago, WCW wasn't a new company. It had been around since 1989, right? So it was, 6 or 7 years old before I launched Nitro. And during that 5, 6, 7 year period of time, whatever it was, WCW had developed a very bad relationship with its audience. WCW was kind of in terms of brand value, it was in a hole. It was in a deficit when I launched Nitro. And one of the reasons that I took on I embraced Eric's the enemy of WWE, personality, was because people were already kind of looking down their nose at us. All the people that were writing, all the dirt sheet writers, some of them who are still around today, all predicted this was just like Turner's folly. There's no way Eric Bischoff's going to be able to do this. There's no way WCW is going to do that. And I understand that because historically, WCW, up until the time I launched Nitro, had failed far more often than it succeeded in the business of the wrestling business. So I understand why it was that way, but I embraced it and thought, okay, well, we're digging ourselves out of a hole. We're not starting on a level playing field here. We're not a new company with a lot of, with a fan base that's hopeful that we're going to be successful. The majority of the wrestling audience, for the most part, looked down their nose at us and looked up to WWE. So I had to reverse that psychology, and I did it in a very aggressive way. But I think from what I remember, being on the receiving end of a lot of that, was that the tribal nature of the wrestling audience was very much the same. It was just really lopsided.
Yeah, no, that's the way I remember it too. I mean, I remember I would have been 11 or 12 years old. Randy Savage was my absolute favorite wrestler. And I remember being so pissed when he showed up on Saturday night. I mean, furious, feeling betrayed. And so, when I see that now, I mean, I guess I was 12 years old, so I could kind of justify it being 12. I don't know that I could justify that kind of behavior in adults, but I at least kind of see where it's coming from in your brain when you attach yourself to a brand like that, and expect the brand loyalty that you have to come back to you, which I think is unrealistic because brands are by nature companies, not emotional things. Is that when you started your tumultuous relationships with dirt sheet writers, would you say? Because, I'm a big fan of your podcast. I love that you're even in the wrestling conversation. Like, I don't take that for granted because for a long time you were out and you really had nothing to do with it. So the fact that you're this heavy back in, I enjoy. I also enjoy when people have opinions, and I like fights. I like arguing, and so I like that you
That's
make.
why wrestling exists. Right?
Yeah, yeah, it's great.
We as viewers are living vicariously through the characters that we watch and appreciate on TV every week. That's why this shit works. That's the psychology.
Is that
You either want to be that person or you want to beat that person. It's one or the other.
right?
If it's good. Now, if you don't care, if you're somewhere in the middle, then you're just going to be flipping through the channels and watching something else.
So to that logic, we'll get back to the dirt sheet thing, but to that logic, then wouldn't what AEW and Tony Khan is doing make sense in a way in that they're trying to create that super loyalty to this brand, that we are the victim of a bigger company bullying us, that we have to fight back, that we are better, and we're going to show everybody that we're better, and you know that we're better, but we've got to show the world that we're better. Isn't that kind of what you think AEW is trying to build when they start taking these direct shots at WWE?
In a chicken shit kind of way, yeah.
Wow.
Then this is, I mean, go back to what I said.
Yeah.
I was very, very respectful of Tony. You know, I probably didn't come off that way to some people.
Yeah, and to be fair, you did just describe his methods as chicken shit, like just now.
Well, they are.
I got you. Okay.
They are, and I'll explain why.
Uh-huh.
If you're going to compete, if you're going to say we have a better product, put it out there, head to head, prove it. Don't tie yourself into knots using in a weekly data gymnastics event trying to prove a point when here's how you put your product out there head to head. Who has the most viewers? And by the way, I want to make this something really clear. I'm not suggesting Tony should go head to head. I think it would probably be a bad move for them right now. But until they do, this is all just hyperbole. This is data nonsense. This is lying with statistics. This is no different. And I don't know a damn thing about baseball, but I think this analogy will probably ring true. You've got a AAA ball club somewhere, the Muskegon Mudhens, and you've got a batter that's batting 600. Is that batter or the head of the Muskegon Mudhens going to go out and compare that batter to somebody who's playing in the major leagues and say that he's got a better batting average? It's two different games. It's two different situations. And I get why they're doing it. It just makes them look juvenile. And again, I'm going to be careful because I'm really supportive of AEW. I really want them to succeed. I want them to do better than WWE. I want WWE to have to fight to be better than AEW. I want that to be true. I have a lot of friends that work at AEW and people that, while I wouldn't consider them friends because we don't really have a relationship, good or bad, are just people that I still have a lot of respect for. So this isn't a sour grapes thing with me. This is a reality thing with me. AEW, probably still, they were the new kids on the block. There was nobody that didn't want AEW to succeed. They were the ultimate babyface underdogs. But the more they continue to use a AAA ball club batting average comparison to a major league player by comparing things that are not really fair to compare because they're not head-to-head competition, the more they do that, the less favorable the audience is going to feel about them, the less of a babyface position they're going to be in. And that equity, by the way, that underdog status is some of the best consumer equity you can build. And to blow it by using these chicken shit data analytics where you're comparing apples and bricks, because, and again, it's not Tony necessarily that's doing it, but well, yeah, he does sometimes. But where you see it the most often are guys, well, obviously Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez, the two sycophants that I don't think have any credibility outside of the little bubble of readership or online presence that they have. Not to suggest that they don't have a lot, they do. But those people will believe anything that comes out of Dave's mouth. don't have the intellectual curiosity to kind of analyze it. They just go, oh, well, they've said it. It must be true. It's not true. When you're comparing a demo, first of all, out of context, because nobody really understands what any of this really means ultimately when it comes down to a dollar sign or a line item on a spreadsheet, right? But when you take the approach of, well, AEW had a higher percentage of their audience in the 18 to 49-year-old demo than WWE did on Monday night. When Monday night is, you have Monday Night Football. You're comparing WWE up against Monday Night Football to an AEW demo, which really doesn't make a fucking bit of difference at the end of the day, but it's a data point. And you're comparing the AEW data point on a Wednesday night when there is no 18 to 49 competition, certainly not to the magnitude of Monday Night Football. It's a false comparison. It's right back to the AAA Muskegon Mud Hen batting average theory. You're comparing apples and oranges, not even apples and oranges, because they're both food. They're both part of a food group. You're comparing apples to bricks.
Yeah.
It's not, and that loses credibility over time. I'm seeing it. I don't know how many responses I've been driving for the last 2 days, so I haven't really looked at my social media, but with close to 1 million impressions and 200 and some odd thousand views, I got a boatload of responses, and the vast majority of them are supportive. Now, I'm also realistic. I know that the people who follow me on social media follow me for a reason, right? And they're going to have a tendency to agree. Not all the time, but on average, they have a tendency to agree with things that I say because they have a relationship with me, or they wouldn't be following me on social media, or they wouldn't be listening to my podcast, right? So I don't take that response and go, oh, see, it proves my point. 98.7% of the people that responded to this tweet, this social media post, responded and agreed with me. So I'm absolutely right. I don't believe that either. It's split in reality, not on my social media feed. My 4,000 responses or whatever they have been, 5,000 that I looked at, the last time I looked at was the count, have all been, it's about time somebody said it. You don't want that. You don't want that. You're the baby face, Tony.
It's almost
be a baby face. Be the underdog. Let the audience do the talking for you instead of you doing the talking. I used to tell that to Diamond Dallas Page all the time. And I love Diamond Dallas Page. But he spent so much time trying to put himself over that nobody around him would be willing to do it. And the minute you stop putting yourself over and let everybody else do the work for you, things change. And that was my whole point. It's not that I don't want AEW to succeed. It's not, I don't have a dog in a hunt. I don't give two shits who wins. Ultimately, I want them both to win. I want the wrestling industry to win. I want the talent to win more than anything. I want the business to be vibrant and healthy. But in my opinion, for whatever it's worth, it's my perspective. I'm an old man. I'm not in the business, according to some of the people. I'm yelling at the clouds. Look, I want them to win, but what I see is AEW unknowingly, because they're inexperienced, and Tony, in my opinion, is working a little too hard, seeking validation, and trying to create a war when he's not willing to get in one.
I also, and maybe I'm putting on my therapist hat here, but this goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of the conversation with Shawn Michaels and the fact that you felt a way about that super kick because super kicks were near and dear to you because you knew what a real super kick was. You've been there, and based on your own experience, it fed your opinion of this. You talked about taking over WCW and starting Nitro and how you had a brand that wrestling fans were looking down on. By the time you took over WCW, there was certainly, and I agree with you, there was a negative look at WCW. It wasn't, I mean, I guess theoretically it was the number 2 wrestling promotion, but by 10 miles, like it wasn't competition and people thought it was cheeseball stuff. Is there part of you, and you keep going back to the head-to-head thing, but I feel like where it's tugging at your heartstrings a little bit is you see a guy who's got a secondary promotion that people are feeling positive towards, and it's almost like you know how valuable that is because you didn't have it, and you're telling a guy not to blow it.
Yeah. Thank you, doctor.
I mean, I feel like I said that better than I like the guy, but he's doing all this chicken shit stuff with his minor league baseball.
Look, I can talk about this in a very intellectual way.
Of course.
But we're talking to wrestling fans here.
Yeah.
And people need to understand. Look, if you agree with me, if people agree with me, fantastic. If they don't agree with me, fantastic. It is not going to change my life one bit. I have a perspective, and I share it. And part of me sharing that is trying to draw analogies to help people better understand. Because let's face it, not a lot of people that are listening to this or listening to my podcast or reading me on social media have any idea of how the television business really works or how wrestling, the business of wrestling really works. They've never been there. All they know is what they read and what they hear. And I try to paint the picture as clearly as I can. And sometimes I use analogies that are less than flattering. And I don't think the minor league baseball analogy was necessarily less than flattering. I'm not saying that AEW is the Muskegon Mudhens, but I am trying to illustrate how ridiculous it is to compare data that is not anywhere, it's not even reasonably close in an analysis because the situations are so much different.
So Dave Meltzer was talking about you, and he said he went over kind of everything that you did, and his the way he looks at the numbers is different from the way you look at the numbers. We'll put it this way. But he also said, in a sense, it was a Bischoff attempt at a publicity con, perhaps with the help of Conrad Thompson, which I don't know why he's dragging Conrad through the mud with you, as he then put "Shut Up and Wrestle" on a T-shirt and put it on sale. And it is true. You did coin that phrase. Now it's on a T-shirt. Here's two things. Number one, did you go in thinking like, okay, this is going to be good for marketing. Shut Up and Wrestle will be a thing. Or number two, is that something that you realized after you said it, oh, this is sticking, let me throw it on a T-shirt?
No, and there's another example of why I've got, such a bad taste in my mouth, especially about Dave Meltzer. Not online newsletters in general, peripheral media, as I refer to them now, in a much more sophisticated and elegant manner. But Dave's a dirt sheet, right? Dave spews shit he knows nothing about. And that comment, and including Conrad Thompson in it, was a perfect example. Mm-hmm. There was no here's the truth. Honest to God truth. Conrad was down in Florida on vacation, right? And Paul Bromwell was going to sit in and host that podcast for me. I got up on a Saturday morning to record that podcast at 6:30 in the morning, not having a clue what we were going to do. Because it was a watch along. There was no reason for me to prep for the show. We're literally watching a show live and commenting about what we're seeing. So I didn't have to do any prep. By the time I sat down in front of my laptop or my computer to record that podcast, I had about 2 cups of coffee in me. I was a little foggy, had no idea what I was going to say. None of that was scripted. None of it was prepared. None of it I didn't even know I was going to say it until the words were coming out of my mouth. I react to what I'm asked often. I don't come to a podcast with an agenda. It depends what the subject matter is and what I hear and what I'm being asked about. Some people like to prep and have all of that stuff laid out. I don't. I like a real, authentic, organic reaction to things, not something that I pre-prepared. So I had no idea I was going to say what I said until after I said it. I went, oh, God, I said that. The Shut Up and Wrestle thing rolled off. I never thought of that before. It just happened. It was spontaneous. It just happened that a lot of people reacted to it and liked it. I had nothing to do with the T-shirt. It was not my idea to come up with a T-shirt, nor was it Conrad Thompson's idea. It was a reaction to the overwhelmingly positive response that podcast got and my comments got on social media. And then we have a whole team of people over at preshows.com that went, oh, that's a shirt. And we put out a shirt. And we're selling them like crazy. So it happened, but it wasn't a con. Anytime Dave. See, that's the thing about Dave. He's kind of a passive aggressive punk. in that he tries to always frame and contextualize things in a way that is negative towards the people that he just doesn't like.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And he, on the other side of that, he'll twist himself into a fucking pretzel trying to put over things that, for whatever reason, probably because of proximity and somebody actually pays attention to him, that he feels close to. That's Dave. He's just disingenuous. And, he always likes to use the word con. If there's anybody that's conning anybody, it's the fact that Dave Meltzer has any inside information that's credible. Does he talk to people? Sure. Do any of those people have any credibility? No. But Dave doesn't care. He'll repeat that trash, and then it ends up on the internet, and people think it's a fact. It's not. He's been proven so wrong so many times by so many people. I can't believe anybody really pays attention to him, but they do.
Well,
and,
this is what I was going to ask you about earlier in regards to him and how that sort of contempt began, because something crossed on my radar. Like, this video just pops up on Twitter every now and then, and I saw it and I've forgotten about it, and then I watched it again. It's a wild ass promo from World War III in 1995. I think most people who probably listen to this know, or maybe they don't know, where Hulk Hogan is with Sting and Macho Man, and they're on the stage, and it's kind of the promo. The promo is supposed to be Hogan kind of taking off his black shirt and his black bandana, and he's getting rid of the dark side. He's back to red and yellow. He's back to Hulkamania. But then for the last part of the promo, he takes out what appears to be a copy of the Wrestling Observer and starts saying stuff like, "Observe this," and he throws it in the trash. And it's one of these moments where I'm like, were they really so upset about Dave Meltzer that they wanted to work it into a promo on a pay-per-view? Was that you? Was that something getting under Hogan's skin? What was that?
I don't think it was necessarily me. I would have been supportive of it, but it wasn't my idea necessarily. That was probably all Hulk. But it's not, look, Dave is a pimple on a hamster's ass, but unfortunately, pimples get infected and sometimes make things complicated. Dave is very bad for the business. That's another thing. That's my issue.
Wow.
Dave thinks he's good for the business, or people think Dave's good for the business. He's not. He's not. And long before I got into management, I saw the kind of problems that even back then, before the internet, dirt sheets were causing. And I'll give you an example. All right, a quick one. There used to be a guy that worked at TBS by the name of Jeff Carr. Jeff Carr was the program director at TBS. Okay. And when Ted brought, wrestling and bought out Jim Crockett Promotions out of bankruptcy and launched WCW on TBS, Jeff Carr was the only person in the building that was actually a wrestling fan. So Jeff Carr got the responsibility to kind of oversee WCW from the Turner Broadcasting point of view. Well, Jeff never left his house. Jeff was a good guy, by the way, nice guy. I liked him. No personal animus at all, nothing like that. But he lived in a tiny little bubble. He was, I guess, a nerd, right? So people can try to understand the context here. But since Jeff Carr didn't have the personality, the desire, the confidence, or anything else to really dig in and learn about the wrestling business, guess what he did? He read the dirt sheets.
I was about to say read about it, yeah.
So Jeff's influence on WCW during some of its most tumultuous and least successful periods of time were affected, sometimes greatly, sometimes a little bit, by Jeff Carr and his perception of the wrestling business based on Dave Meltzer's dirt sheet. I saw it. I was a C-Squad announcer. I didn't really give a fuck. As long as my checks were in the mail, as long as I was doing the best job that I could do, that stuff was not in my wheelhouse. I wasn't concerned with it. I was aware of it, but I wasn't concerned with it. But I watched it. I watched what happened. So for people to think it's just okay to spew a bunch of nonsense that isn't true, kind of like Dave did when he suggested that Conrad and I did all this to create a T-shirt and created a con in order to sell a shirt. Completely false. But it doesn't matter to Dave. Dave didn't bother to pick up the phone and ask, hey, why did you guys come up with that t-shirt? Because somebody would have told him, right?
Yeah.
He could have called Conrad. He and Conrad are friends, I think.
Yeah.
He could have called Conrad and say, hey, Conrad, did you guys really come up with that skit just to sell t-shirts? And Conrad would have told him the truth. Dave doesn't want to do that. And that's a perfect example of typically what Dave doesn't do. He just spews bullshit and everybody thinks it's true.
I'll tell you for the record that I like Dave because I like hearing his analysis. I like hearing his historical perspective. I like that he comes from a place as somebody that's been watching wrestling for all these decades upon decades and takes wrestling seriously and he can put things a lot of times in his opinion into historical context and I don't know, I like hearing his take and his analysis on things. I think maybe the problem comes up when people read his or anyone's stuff as if it's the Bible, as opposed to just an informed, I mean, because he is an expert as a consumer of wrestling. Could we at least say that? I mean, clearly, if anybody is an expert from the perspective of consuming and observing professional wrestling from that space, Dave fits the bill.
I don't know. First of all, and let me preface this. I often agree with a lot of Dave's opinion or analysis of wrestling, the product in the ring. I would more often agree with Dave's opinion, subjective opinion, because that's what it is. It's subjective opinion. Is he an expert subjective opinionist? I'll give you that. I'll buy that. There's a t-shirt. See?
Yeah, there it is.
You conned me into coming up with a t-shirt.
And it's going to say it. And maybe he's in business with Sam Roberts on this, but they've got another t-shirt. Well,
I'll wrap this up quick.
Yeah.
My issue isn't with Dave's opinion about the product, certainly not with his historical perspective. My issue is when he puts things out there as fact, when indeed they're nothing but opinion, and doesn't identify sources. And I'm not saying name names, but what was I read the other day? Vince's backstage reaction. First of all, people that are putting this crap out there and you use backstage report, you're not backstage.
Right.
Unless you're backstage, don't say it's a backstage report. It's a lie. It's misleading. It's a con. That's a con. You're creating confidence. You're trying to establish confidence in yourself by people into believing something that isn't true. You weren't backstage. Now, granted, it's tough to get backstage, as you know,
yeah.
Right? But if you're going to say, we talked to two individuals who confided this information to us, identify it as two individuals who confided an opinion to you or an observation to you. Don't come out and say, Vince McMahon visibly upset. Didn't show it in front of the entire crowd. But don't paint a picture that's just a figment of your imagination. It's fucking artwork. It's not fact. It's not even subjective opinion. There's a lot of things that I agree with when I hear some of the things that Dave has written. And I acknowledge it on my podcast. When it comes to what he likes in wrestling and what I like in wrestling, we don't agree on everything. But or I don't have the same opinion as he does. It's not a matter of agreeing or disagreeing. If you like red and I like blue, it doesn't mean you're wrong for liking red or I'm wrong for liking blue. You just like two different things. That's okay. I got no issues with that. But it's the intentional falsifying of information, cloaking it as fact when indeed it's a rumor or it's a subjective opinion. That's my issue.
And I will say that as somebody who has read a ton of newsletters and as somebody who's been lucky enough to be backstage quite a bit, there is a stark difference between the world that's painted in a newsletter and a world that exists in reality backstage. I know that you have to go, but I do...
No, that's all right. I'm having fun with you. So
okay, good. Good, because I do want to bring up, I mean, the one thing that I remember when we talk about competing and what you guys at WCW did, and I don't remember timeline-wise if this is at the very beginning of Nitro. It was probably towards the beginning of Nitro. I don't think you were doing this before Nitro. But I do remember that when WWE started bringing guys in, like after Hogan and Macho came over to WCW, and it was like when Steve Austin and Vader and some of those other guys ended up, making the journey to Stamford, that you guys started running bumpers before every commercial break. And it would say WCW where the big boys play. And you would never say anything and you would never be direct about it. But if you watch them, it was every single time. It was a now WWE guy getting beaten up by a now WCW guy. It was Mick Foley getting beaten up by somebody. It was Ric Flair beating up Vader. It was always a current WWE guy who used to be a WCW guy getting beaten up. Do you remember making those?
I remember the campaign.
Yeah.
It was something that Sharon Sadello, who was the head of marketing at the time, commissioned a market research company to come up with a branding statement that we could use in the show. And that's where that came from. That wasn't my idea. And I liked it, by the way, because it had kind of a double entendre to it to a degree. But yeah, I do remember it, of course.
But it wasn't your idea to have like not only for it to be where the big boys play, but for that to be the theme, that it's our guys beating up your guys before we go to break every time.
I don't think that was the intent. That might have been, it might have looked that way, and it might have been that way.
Yeah.
Certainly, I don't know. I mean, I'd have to go back and look, but I don't think, I know I wasn't so invested with where the big boys play that I would have created programming around it. It was a general branding statement. We wanted people to realize that we had bigger stars. We wanted people to believe we had bigger stars.
Yeah.
And we wanted to market that fact that we had bigger stars, even though we really didn't. We wanted to make people think we did. So we told them. And, you tell people something long enough, they start to believe it.
Yeah.
But I don't think that we actually created matches and situations around a branding campaign.
If you could go back to the original statement about the AEW, WWE thing, would you take out the term cosplay? Because
No.
I mean, did you see Chris Jericho's tweet? He was real pissed that you said cosplay. It was pejorative. I think that's the word I'm looking for.
What? No, it is what it is. It is what it is. Look, have you ever been to a Comic-Con?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. San Diego, New York. Yeah.
Have you ever seen the people and they spend a fortune on these, these outfits, and they're pretending to be or dressing up like their favorite, Spock. All right. And they walk around. People actually ask them for their autographs.
Mm-hmm. Pictures. Mm-hmm.
And some of those people actually start to believe they were in the original series. Right.
Yeah.
It's a little weird.
Uh-huh.
And that was an example of my Muskegee Mud Hens analysis. You can pretend all you want, and it's not the same as being there. And the constant out of, and this, before, and look, the move that WWE made by going an extra half an hour against Dynamite, that was an aggressive move. That was an offensive move. It wasn't a defensive move. It was an offensive move. And I loved that Tony countered. I was fully supportive of that. The part that gets me is when they undermine themselves and their own credibility by trying to do the Muskegee Mud Hen batting average analysis. It's just stupid, and people see through it. I'm all for them competing. And my cosplay comment, and I'm sorry I upset Chris, because I like Chris a lot. I have a ton of respect for Chris and enjoy being around him and working with him. But, dude, you've been there. You know better. And I have to believe that there are people in Tony's organization, AEW right now, that sure they're going to go along with it. Just like people went along with some of the things that I did, early on with Nitro, but they were like, oh God, I wish you would stop. Stop that.
Well, besides the obviously the classic that'll put butts in seats line that had everybody switch over and Mick Foley won the title and everything, I think that's been well discussed. Were there any specific competitive moves that you made on Nitro? Because you made a lot of them that you pretty quickly realized was a mistake, and you were like, let's not do that again.
No. But again, and here's the difference. And again, some of the negative feedback I got was like, how could you? Even Tony Khan said, "Oh, it's laughable." Eric came down from the ceiling on a motorcycle wearing a crown.
Yeah, you did.
Push the camp to a fight. Yeah, I did that. But guess what, Tony? Here's the difference. I didn't have some little nerd with a graph in a computer, or in a calculator, trying to convert data and statistics and trying to paint a picture that I was actually competing. I was actually competing.
Mm-hmm.
Of course I did those things. Of course and going back to what we talked about earlier, I was already the heel. WCW was already the heel. Nobody wanted us to succeed. Well, guess what? You put me in a corner like that, I'm going to fight my way out. And that's exactly what I did. Tony's not in that situation. And AEW's not in that situation. But so many of their talent are doing the same thing. You know, and when we get to my podcast, and again, I'm not using you as a teaser here.
No, it's fine.
I haven't thought through exactly what I'm going to say yet. And although I very rarely prep in detail for a show, I'll go back and watch a show if I'm doing a recap of an event or a Nitro or pay-per-view. Of course, I go back and I watch it and I take notes and all that. But I don't have a script. I don't have notes written down. I just familiarize myself with what I'm about to do. But I know this weekend I'm going to be recording a podcast, and it's going to be an Ask Eric Anakin podcast. So I'm going to get overwhelmed with this kind of stuff. And I'm going to talk about, I'm not even going to name their names, some of the talent that have made some of the most ridiculous statements that have undermined not only themselves, but the product and shot themselves in the foot for no reason. There's a time and a place for it. But if you're not willing to get in the ring and put on the gloves and stand toe-to-toe and actually fight to see who wins, don't sit outside in the audience, or better yet, or worse yet, outside of the venue where it's safe and you don't really have to compare or compete and make those types of comments, because you'll lose credibility in the long run. Sure, you've got some internet, people that are going to, anything you say, they're going to grab onto, just like some people do for me. And I get that. But it's like death by 1,000 cuts. And that's what I react to. I don't want them to fail. Mm-hmm. Believe it or not. Doesn't come off that way, I guess. But I don't want them. And I don't think they're going to fail, by the way. I think they're going to be successful. I just want them to be more successful. If you look at the numbers, here's what doesn't lie. Numbers, real numbers, mm-hmm. Not twisting and turning and, doing the Muskegee Mudhead, data dance. I'm talking about real numbers. The AEW right now has about half of the viewing audience of WWE. You don't have to be, a data analyst to figure that out. It's right there in front of you. Their highest rated show, WWE's highest rated show, WWE's second highest rated show. They're about half, sometimes 60% during Monday Night Football. That's it. You want to compare money? WWE made more money yesterday than AEW is going to make all year from their license fee, which is the majority of their revenue from TBS. They made more money yesterday. So you can't compare the two companies financially. You can't compare the two companies in terms of real, honest viewership, right? Now, you can dig and dive and do the Muskegee Mudhen analysis if you want to try to paint the picture that it's more competitive than it really is, but none of that data really matters. Do you think a media buyer is going to sit down and go, I don't know, man, CM Punk against somebody else had a slightly higher demo than WWE? You're not doing that. That's not how media is purchased. That's not how revenue is generated in the television industry. But that's the dialogue, right? That's the narrative that's being used to try to paint a picture that isn't real.
You guys were at the height of the Monday Night Wars. You guys were planting signs in the crowd at Nitro, right?
We may have on occasions, but generally that shit took on a life of its own.
Right.
Well, I'm not saying we didn't, because
sure.
I'm sure that we probably did for creative purposes. Occasionally, but it would have been very, very occasionally. There wasn't like a sign maker guy,
right,
sitting backstage cranking out signs. That didn't happen.
I do feel though, like if this were like Monday Night Wars territory, where it was like two companies fighting, like just going for each other's throats every single week, I feel like Eric, you would be the one who brought Twitter bots into the war. Like you would figure out how to use technology and create a Twitter bot army for Nitro.
I guess I know too much about Twitter bots, so I kind of now had I not known, anything about Twitter bots, if somebody would have said, "Here, I've got a way that you can dominate, social media on Twitter." With this technology, you're right. I would have bought into it, and I probably would have been angry with myself afterwards because it's not real.
Right.
Bullshit.
Right.
I tend to like real shit, not fake shit.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have probably fired whoever it was that convinced me to do it.
you would have done it, and then you would have fired the guy. Yeah, I love that you're seeing the whole life cycle through already. Well, look, of course, 83 Weeks is available over at adfreeshows.com. I listen all the time. I love it. As I said before, I love that you're an active part of the wrestling conversation, because that wasn't the case for a long time. So it's super cool when something like this happens. And I'm sure this has happened a lot on your podcast too, because this isn't the first time that, you've made controversial statements and the internet's gone nuts. Do you start to get that hunger for performing again? Like, do you start to feel, because there is an intoxicating thing about having everybody, whether they're for or against you, just having people react is an intoxicating thing. And when it happens on the internet, does it kind of make you go, this would be fun to get in the ring and have a bunch of people booing me again?
Weeks ago, in what I thought was a very complimentary comment that I made on social media and on my podcast, when AEW when they had their show at Arthur Ashe, I think the comment I made, I'm paraphrasing myself here because I don't remember exactly, but was something to the effect of, I've got a massive dose of very healthy envy for AEW, for Tony, for everybody associated with AEW, because I know that feeling. I know the excitement. And it is, to your point, an intoxicating effect that you can't get anywhere else. It's impossible. I'm going to see the Rolling Stones 2 days from now. The Rolling Stones aren't touring because they need the money. Rolling Stones are touring because they can't get that fix anywhere else. They have to tour. And I'm that way. I mean, in terms of performing, I still have that. So yes, part of me loves performing. I do. There's no question about that. But there's another part of me that knows that window's way behind me. I'm not trying to, nor would I. I mean, I love my life the way it is right now. I wouldn't trade my life or my lifestyle for anything. 20 years ago, absolutely. This kind of reaction would have probably made me change course, in terms of my interest in getting involved in the business again. But like I said, it's in my rearview mirror, man. I enjoy what I do right now. I love doing the podcast. If it creates controversy, and that's the part that I get it. I don't want to be stupid about this. I understand why people reacted passionately the way they did, both in support of my opinion and as opposed to it as well. But it doesn't make me wish or desire or fantasize about getting back in the business again.
Well, then everybody better go get your podcast. That's where you're going to get your Eric Bischoff fill. So go and get it. And I appreciate it, man. Anytime you want to come on here, please say the word.
Sam, I very much appreciate it. And I look forward to you getting the response that you're going to get.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, man.
All right. Be well.